It's 1971, and David Gilmour is alone in Abbey Road Studios, frustrated and exhausted. He's been experimenting with effects for hours, trying to create something, anything, that could capture the otherworldly atmosphere Pink Floyd desperately needed for their new album.
Often doesn't really work quite that way in the studio. It's not down to a musical rapport between us.
His fingers are cramped, his ears are ringing, and in a moment of careless fatigue, he makes a simple mistake. He wires his wah-wah pedal backwards. What happens next would accidentally create one of the most haunting and recognizable sounds in rock history.
But we are very into sort of timeless, ageless, spacious sort of moods in our music, very often atmospheric.
A sound so perfect, so ethereal, that it would define not just a song, but an entire era of progressive rock.
But we'd used this same trick before on Echoes.
This is the story of how a studio accident became Pink Floyd's greatest sonic achievement. The year 1971 was make or break for Pink Floyd. They had just lost their founding member and creative genius, Syd Barrett, and the pressure was mounting to prove they could survive without him. Roger Waters was pushing the band toward more conceptual territory, while Gilmour was still finding his voice as the new lead guitarist.
Playing with these sort of rhythms and sounds on stage at sound checks, probably in the late 60s, but I never quite found where to use it until Echoes.
The sessions for what would become Meddle were tense, experimental, and often frustrating. Gilmour had always been a perfectionist, spending countless hours tweaking his sound, searching for that perfect tone that would set Pink Floyd apart from every other band of the era. He was known to arrive at the studio early and stay late, often working alone with just the engineer, exploring the possibilities of his equipment in ways that would have seemed impossible to previous generations of musicians. The wah-wah pedal, a relatively new piece of technology at the time, was supposed to create that classic sweeping sound that had become popular in the late 60s. When wired correctly, it would start with a low, muffled tone and sweep upward to a bright, cutting sound as you rocked the pedal forward. But Gilmour, in his tired state, had connected the wires in reverse. When he first struck the chord and began to rock the pedal, instead of the familiar wah sound, something completely unexpected emerged from his amplifier. The effect was inverted, creating an ascending pitch that sounded nothing like a guitar. It was high, piercing, and strangely organic. It sounded like the cry of a seagull, or perhaps some mythical sea creature calling across an endless ocean. But this wasn't actually the first time this sound had appeared in Pink Floyd's work. If you listen carefully to their earlier experimental piece, called Embryo, recorded during sessions in February 1970, you can hear the earliest version of this effect. Gilmour had been experimenting with the backwards wiring even then, but it was during the Meddle sessions that he truly perfected it and understood its potential. The seagull effect, as it came to be known among the band and their engineers, became the centerpiece of Echoes. But creating the final version wasn't simple. Gilmour spent weeks perfecting the technique, learning exactly how to manipulate the pedal to create different types of calls and cries. He discovered that by varying his picking attack, his finger vibrato, and the speed of the pedal movement, he could create an entire range of sounds that seemed to tell a story without words. The emotional impact of this accident cannot be overstated. When you listen to Echoes today, those seagull cries don't just provide atmosphere. They provide the emotional heart of the piece. They represent longing, isolation, the call of something wild and free. They transport the listener to wind-swept coastlines, to vast empty spaces, to moments of profound solitude and beauty. What makes this story even more remarkable is how it reflects the creative process of Pink Floyd as a whole. This was a band that never settled for the conventional, never accepted that things had to be done the way they had always been done. They were constantly experimenting, constantly pushing boundaries, and most importantly, they were always open to the happy accident, the unexpected discovery that could transform their music. The backwards wah-wah effect became so integral to Pink Floyd's sound that Gilmour continued to use it throughout his career. You can hear variations of it on The Dark Side of the Moon, on Wish You Were Here, and even on his solo albums decades later. But it was never quite the same as those original seagull cries on Echoes, created in that moment of exhausted experimentation in 1971. This accident also reveals something profound about the nature of creativity itself. Some of the greatest artistic breakthroughs in history have come not from careful planning or deliberate intention, but from mistakes, accidents, and happy coincidences that open up new possibilities. The backwards wah-wah effect is a perfect example of how technical limitations or errors can become creative opportunities in the hands of an artist who is truly listening. The impact of this single mistake rippled far beyond Pink Floyd. Countless guitarists and musicians heard those seagull cries on Echoes and began experimenting with their own equipment, looking for their own happy accidents. The effect influenced everything from ambient music to film soundtracks, and you can still hear its influence in contemporary music today. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this story is how it captures the essence of what made Pink Floyd special. They weren't just musicians playing songs. They were sonic explorers, constantly searching for new ways to express the inexpressible. That backwards wah-wah pedal became a gateway to emotions that existed beyond the reach of conventional rock music. Roger Waters later described those sessions as some of the most emotionally intense moments of his life. He said that when Gilmour began to play those seagull effects, it was as if the studio itself became transformed. The walls seemed to disappear, and suddenly they were all floating in some vast, oceanic space where time moved differently and ordinary rules no longer applied. Nick Mason, as the drummer, found that he had to completely reimagine his approach to rhythm when playing alongside these effects. The seagull cries didn't follow conventional musical timing. They flowed like natural phenomena, like wind or waves, and he had to learn to play with them rather than against them. It was a lesson in musical empathy that would influence his drumming for the rest of his career. Richard Wright, as the keyboard player, discovered that his piano and organ parts needed to create space for these otherworldly sounds. He began to think of his role not as providing harmonic support, but as creating an atmospheric foundation that would allow Gilmour's seagull effects to soar and dive with complete freedom. The interplay between Wright's keyboards and Gilmour's backwards wah-wah became one of the most emotionally powerful partnerships in rock history. Years later, when fans would ask Gilmour about the secret to creating such emotionally powerful sounds, he would often return to that moment in 1971 when he first heard those seagull cries. He would talk about the importance of staying open to accidents, of listening not just to what you're trying to create, but to what the music itself is trying to tell you.